Hello and welcome to Managing Global Teams Remotely. Communicate to influence and motivate. This is quite a hot topic at the moment, so I hope that you can find something useful here today. Let's start with our agenda. First, we will go through and discuss some challenges of managing a remote team. Of course, there are a few that maybe you're facing at the moment, especially if your team only recently started to work remotely. Then, with number 2, we will talk about some of the advice that's available to help with remote working. We will discuss how useful this advice is for a global team. Basically, it is useful, but not all of it is suitable for a global team. And you need to make some adjustments. So what should we do instead if we don't follow the advice that's out there? Well, we've got some ideas and we'll share with you in number 3. Communication tips. Now, number 4 is all about using your strengths. When we get there, you will see that the strengths I will talk about are from Japanese culture. It's important to us that in teaching and helping clients to communicate better interculturally, we don't ask them to completely change their behavior to become something they're not. So I will give 3 examples of how you can apply Japanese concepts to help you communicate with global colleagues and manage your global team. I just want to mention what we won't cover today. Technology is not our expertise, so we won't be talking about any programs or apps out there for monitoring staff or collaboration or any video conferencing. Also, we won't cover the deeper managerial issues beyond communicating to motivate. That's for another day. So let's start by looking at some of the challenges we face when managing remotely. They range from the more basic technical difficulties like dealing with time differences to deeper managerial issues. And in the middle there, we have some communication challenges. A lot of these challenges can be traced back to difference in culture. People from different cultures see things through different eyes and perspectives and can misunderstand each other very easily. This can lead to people not being so involved or engaged in meetings. They can switch off because they feel the meeting is not really for them. The biggest list there, as you can see, is the management and collaboration issues. I'm sure some of you are experiencing some of these at the moment. These are challenges to do with making sure the team work well and get things done as they should. These are the hardest to solve and probably the most important, but if you can get it right, it can be very rewarding. We've talked about challenges, but there are benefits to working remotely too. Diverse teams can provide many more options to explore, so there's more information from which to make a decision. Also, you would think that productivity would go down, but there is no commute, office lunch, office distractions, so it can be better at home for some, but it depends on the team. Work-life balance can improve, which makes a more inclusive atmosphere. I personally could not have continued to work when our son was very young if I couldn't work remotely. So if you can make it work for you, you can see the benefits, and they're very rewarding. So let's look at some advice that's out there for better remote working. This is a selection of advice I got from a quick Google search. I think I Googled remote working tips. There's so much available and some are in agreement, but there are some opposites. Some of them don't agree at all. So what do you listen to and what do you ignore? Well, they don't always apply in a global context, or if they apply, they should come with some provisos, some things to keep in mind. You basically should take them and adjust them slightly for global teams. I chose 5 examples to focus on. Here we have over-communicate, video conferencing, trust, non-work chats, and setting up communication norms. Let's look at these in more detail. Over-communicate. Different cultures have different understandings of what is not said. So maybe one person might think because you didn't say anything about X is not important. But for another person from another culture, they might read that X was too important to talk about. If you say too much sometimes, this can sometimes damage the relationship. So I wouldn't use that rule literally all the time. But you can always check when you say something that it was understood by saying something like, "Is that okay? Was that clear? Or do you need anything else to be getting on with things?" So video conferencing is a good way to receive feedback on what you're saying and can be good for managing discussion, as you can sometimes tell when someone wants to speak. But if you see the reaction of everyone at the same time, it can be hard to manage, very noisy, and some people just don't react. So it's not always accurate. You have to go with what's best for the audience, I think, which may be a combination of different communication methods, such as maybe a group call followed by an email, or a one-to-one call and a group WhatsApp notice. Now, trust. I saw a lot about trust for remote working. A lot of people say managers must trust their team to be productive, and the team must trust the manager to be open with them and to support them. Well, okay. If people have not worked from home before, or they don't know how to get the work done without supervision, they can't be trusted to just get on with it, can they? But you can lead them through it. We'll talk a bit about that later. So this is another popular one, having non-work chats. Some places and some people just don't like to chat about non-work stuff. I'm actually one of them. If you ask something, you can keep it light and general to begin with. Like, for instance, you could say, "How are things?" Then they can tell you more if they want, and you should note it down. Or they can just say, "Okay." It's up to them. If they say okay, then maybe the conversation's over. Move on to work. The next call, though, you can follow up on something they did say. So then you can build the relationship and trust little by little. You can get to know each other, just like in the real world. So communication norms like when do we meet, or how do we use WhatsApp, or who takes the minutes, and whether you always send out an agenda, are a good idea to agree with the team, especially at the beginning. But do be flexible to adjust to somebody's needs, and also encourage people to challenge the rules if they see the needs of the team changing. Often people stick to old rules for too long when they're not so useful anymore. When the nature of the work has changed or the nature of the team has changed, be ready to change. So we looked at some things you can do to adjust the advice out there to apply it to global teams. But how do we really move forward and motivate our teams? How do we influence them and make sure they're doing what they should? If you follow this strategy, these 3 steps, it will make managing and motivating your team easier and more effective. The first thing to understand is that managing remotely is a different world from managing face-to-face. Then, once you've adjusted your mindset, you need to plan all your communication, all of it. And lastly, you need to keep going. I've called this step gardening, as I think it's a good image. You have to keep looking after your garden to keep it growing well. So let's look at step 1. You're not doing the work as a manager. Fundamental, right? You have to motivate your team to get the work done. So you need to do what it takes to make that happen. If you look at the outcomes first, look at what needs to be done, and then work backwards, then you will know what you need to do to manage your team. So instead of checking that they're working, don't focus on the work that they're currently doing. Focus on the outcome and work backwards. So do they need training or some support? Maybe setting clear expectations, that's a good one. Or step-by-step instructions. Maybe just timelines and milestones. So plan to get it to them. Now remember, some people have never managed themselves at home before, so they might not know even how to begin. They might need step-by-step instructions, for instance. Others need you to trust them and respect their expertise. Maybe they've been doing it a long time, or you know they can get the work done. So maybe just set the date and then check in on them once in a while. Now, when I say plan all communication, I mean all of it, not just presentations or big meetings. Communication is like breathing. We do it all the time, but take it for granted. The difference is we were born knowing how to breathe, but you have to train yourself to communicate well. You can't take it for granted, really. Not if you're going to do it well. So again, start with what you want to achieve, and then consider things like the audience perspective and, what position they're in, what knowledge do they have, what is it that you want them to do, what action do you want them to take, and what will they get from doing that? What's the benefit to them? That will help you to influence them and motivate them in the right direction. Also, spend time thinking about the next step. How might they respond, and what will you do after that? Always plan ahead. You're not planning exactly what will be said, though. It's not a play, and it shouldn't be scripted, but you should make sure that you're clear about the intention so that everything is on purpose. All your communication is on purpose and clear. So now we will talk about the gardening, which might sound a bit strange, but I thought it's a good way to illustrate the growing and changing nature of your remote team. So you must water regularly, but only as often as you need. And that's what we talked about earlier. Check in on people. And that's not checking up on people. Checking up is monitoring. But checking in is making sure that everything's okay for them. So you can say, maybe call a team member daily to check in. Maybe they're a little bit less mature and they can't really work on their own very easily. And you can check in and say, I don't know, anything I can do to help? This shows that you're supporting, but also gives you an update. So it's a mutual exchange of information. You will get an update as to what your member is doing, and they will feel supported by their manager. Or you could email once a week to get a progress report. So that may be for someone more experienced who knows what they're doing. Whatever you think would help the team member progress more, you should do. Now, weeding, you need to help them prioritize and get rid of unnecessary work to keep them on track. They may not ask for this help, so you might have to pick up signals from them or the rest of the team. So stay alert if a member of your team is struggling and act accordingly. The third thing is install a support. Now, I mean by that maybe a trellis is big support, or just a stick in a pot. So that the plant grows the right way. You want to keep the direction going, the direction of growth, and help your team to know where they need to go. If you can keep tending to your garden, you will start to see the fruit. That means that your team can be more innovative because more members can share their ideas and some cross-pollination can happen. So just before I move on, we go over the 3 steps. The first one is to change your mindset. Reframe the situation so that you are focused on the outcomes and not on the current activity of your team. Number 2 is about planning your communication. Always plan everything you say, even if it's just a little bit. Make sure you do it on purpose. Number 3 is gardening. Tend to that garden so that it will grow in the way that you want. Don't let it fall by the wayside. Don't let your weeds get out of control. Keep on top of it. So now you have your 3 steps to move forward. I want to talk about some things you can do to build your confidence using the skills that you have. Now, this is aimed primarily at a Japanese audience, so apologies to anybody who isn't familiar with these concepts. However, I think by the descriptions, you will be able to use similar skills that you may find somewhere. I'm very passionate about helping people become more global, while also keeping a strong identity and not changing too much to adjust to another culture. It's important to know who you are and keep an identity. So many people assimilate to a different culture and they do a really good job in that other culture, but they lose a sense of who they are. And as a result, they lose their authentic voice. Now, as a leader, your authentic voice is everything. It's so important to show people what your voice is and what you're trying to say. So don't lose that. Adjust, but don't lose your sense of self. So the first cultural concept I'm going to talk about is kuki oyomu, which can help you tune into those from another culture. For those of you who are not familiar, this is about what we call reading the air. It's about sensing the atmosphere so that you know what people are feeling and thinking, and you can anticipate their needs. The second is nemawashi, which is usually used for gathering, for building consensus before a meeting. So that essentially the decision is already made before the meeting. But in this case, we're going to talk about how it can help you gather ideas and information before the discussion so that more insights can come to light. And the third is kankei dushi, which can help you build relationships remotely. I'll go through each one in more detail. So the first is kuki oyomu. If you can be in tune with the person you are speaking to, you are more than halfway to excellent communication. Great communication is about what the audience needs to hear rather than what you need to say. So try to listen more and look more at their reaction and read the air. Then you can learn to anticipate their needs, and that will help you to guide and influence them. So another good example is this concept of nemawashi. As well as building consensus, of course, you can use your experience and your skills to be inclusive and to gather the thoughts of people who are less likely to speak up in a group meeting. If you plan the order of people how you speak to them, maybe choose your influencers carefully, you can use it to avoid conflict as well and help combat resistance. It's really important to give people a voice in a remote meeting and facilitate that well, because often it can be dominated by just a few voices and then everybody else will become disengaged. So one of the biggest challenges I feel when working remotely is the time it takes to get information, especially when you're talking with someone from a different culture. It can take a while to get the answer from them without being very direct, which is not easy to do. Now, even if you are direct, they still might not understand what you want because of the cultural language difference. I always like to be softer on the phone or on video, because if you raise your voice or get annoyed, it magnifies so much when you're remote. It becomes bigger than it needs to be, and the other person could get easily offended. Working remotely means your network is so much more important. You need to be able to call someone and know that they will answer you. Know that they will reply to your email when you need it. So that means they have to want to do it. Not because they have to, they want to do it. You can't walk up to someone's desk and stand over them until they give you what you want. That's why it's important to prioritize the relationship over the short-term result. So when an issue is complex, plan on having a few conversations before getting the result and add that extra time into your plan. Thanks again for listening. I hope you found something you can take away and use. If you have any further questions about what you heard today or the work that we do, please get in touch on the details at the bottom of this slide. This page lists projects that we've done for managers all over the world. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.